In our last video, in the last videos that we've been doing, we've actually created the index page, about us page, projects page, and then the individual project page is the one that we created last. The last page that we have to create now is going to be the contact us form. Now, this contact us form or contact us page will have other elements included in it. However, just keep in mind, we're only doing the HTML and CSS on this form. We will not be focusing on creating an actual lift or handler file from like PHP or something like that to be able to handle the submission of this form. We're just looking at HTML and CSS only in these videos. If you're interested in me maybe helping create one file such as that can be handled through the backend to send a form, then just leave it in the comments below. I may be able to, depending on time, I may be able to create that for you. But in this case, again, we're just going to create the contact form. So what I did is I duplicated the templates page, or the projects page, and now I'm going to start building our contact us form. So let's go right here. We're going to go into contact.html. As you can see, everything is kind of already there. Let me go ahead and minimize some of these to avoid some of the jumping up and down. And let's go ahead and start creating this. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do the class container, div class row, and then we're going to create a couple elements here. So the first one is going to be div class call extra small 12. And then we're also going to do a call medium 8. Okay, you'll see why we're doing this. And then, of course, we're going to create another one because we need to complete the 12 column grid here. So call extra small 12. And then call medium 4. This one is also going to have a class of sidebar. We're going to use this as a sidebar for our page. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the content that we had in the footer. For example, you can see that here, the H3 with the address and all that information. What I'm doing is I'm going to copy this over, and we're also going to include it in the sidebar so that users don't have to go all the way down to the footer to be able to see the page or how it changes here. Now, one thing that I did do in the background is I actually went to the footer styles down here and where I had set up the address only for the footer, I just made it so that it would select anytime the address element is selected on the CSS, anytime that it appears on the site, it uses the font style as normal. So that's the one change that I made here. Another thing that we're going to do on the contact.html page is we're also going to add an H4 here with the title of social media. This would also help media here, and then contact information. This will help and also kind of separate this top content with this bottom content, or even something maybe like this, stay connected. Something that I've seen more often in websites as well. Stay connected. Okay, perfect. Now, what I want to do is that you'll see that the sidebar here, it has the font is a little bit bigger, and the way that I like for a sidebar to be is to be a little bit smaller, the content here than the content on the main content area. So let's go ahead and just so that you can see and compare, we're going to add an H2. Actually, let's go ahead and open up, say for example, the projects page. Go down here and select this heading area right here, or actually just these right here. Perfect. Go to the contact and we're going to paste it here. And then here we're going to type get in contact. And of course, hopefully we'll have a paragraph in there kind of explaining what we did and why is it important to get in contact with us, and how when you're expecting to kind of we should be getting back to you, etc., etc., etc. So now you can see we have the contact information and they have the same weight. I also, whenever I use a sidebar, I try to make it so that it actually has a little bit less of a weight compared to the main content. So what we're going to do, let me go ahead and close these projects because we don't need that anymore. And now we're going to go in here and we have this sidebar here. What we're going to do is we're going to create some styles for this sidebar. Let's go over here and we're going to add another section called sidebar. End of sidebar. Perfect. Now we're going to do sidebar and we're going to make the font style be a little bit smaller, just the same way that we did the footer. If you look at the footer description, we're actually making the font size a little bit smaller on the footer. So let's take a look at that here, inspect. And the footer font size is 0.9 rem. So let's go ahead and make that happen. Font size 0.9 rem. Perfect. And that will make all these font sizes on the right hand side smaller. I also want to add a style for this address. If it has a link, I really don't want that link to be the same color as the other links. So I'm going to make it the same color as what we're making our main font itself, right? So let's go ahead and inspect that. We have the paragraph and we're making the font color to be 333. So let's do the same thing here. So sidebar, sidebar address, and then of course it's an anchor tag. So link, color, and it's going to be that 333, 333. Perfect. Active, hover, and visited. All right. Now that we've done that, you can see that color in there. And we can also make it so that there's no text decoration, so that it doesn't have that underline underneath it. And we still have the phone number, email address, all that information in there. Now, one thing that we could do as well is that if we click here, of course, it's going to take us to our Google Maps, showing where we actually had the location, because we're using the White House as our main address. What we can do here is we can do share, and we can do embed map. We can copy that HTML, and then we can go back to our HTML page and add another section where we can add a new class container, div class row, div class call extra small 12, where we can actually add, for example, our map of the location that we're in. So visit our store, for example, and then here we can just paste this in, and that'll be our map. Now let's go ahead and refresh our page. We have the contact, visit our store, and this is how that's looking. However, I think that we can do better. I think we can make it look a little bit wider, more narrower, kind of the same way that we did our homepage. If we go back to our homepage, where we did these images like this, that they have the 16:9 resolution, I think we can do something like that as well here. So let's go ahead and do that here. Let's go ahead and add a div with a class of, let's see, wider 16:9, right? We can go ahead and wrap our iframe with that in there. And let's go ahead and I'm going to remove the width and the height of this element here, so that we can affect it or change it as we're changing our CSS. Now if we refresh, see it became a lot smaller. So let's go to style and let's go ahead and change this here. Let's copy this 16:9. And this should be very similar to what we did, 16:9 map. Same thing that we did for that image. So it's going to be the very same steps that we're going to put in implementation here as well. So we're going to select the 16 by map, and then here we're going to say that is a display. We can do display block, overflow hidden with 100%. and then padding bottom is going to be, if it's 16 by 9, 56.25%, 5%, which again is 9 divided by 16, okay? All right, so now that's the padding bottom. If we refresh this, nothing has changed except that, of course, this is a little bit bigger now because we have that padding bottom. So let's go ahead and add this more styles here. So wider 16 by 9, and then iframe. Iframe, we're going to make it 100% width. Height is going to be 100%. Position is going to be absolute. Top, right, bottom, and left is going to be all 0. And then what we're going to do here, I believe that's all we need to do. So let's go ahead and refresh. All right, and now that we refresh this, you can see that we have that 16 by 9 in there. And now the map occupies the full space. If we move and make it responsive, you can see how that size starts getting smaller and how it starts getting bigger as we also zoom out of the browser. You can see that, so it's responsive and it shows us the map. I think that looks really, really good. We have the contact information on the right, and we have a little paragraph introducing ourselves. So let's go ahead and do the next step, which is going to be actually creating the form. So I don't need this anymore. And then we have our styles here, perfect. And do I need the sidebar? I don't need the sidebar anymore, so I'm gonna make that a little bit smaller, make it smaller, compress it, and we're going to start adding our form. So the first thing that we need to do is add our form tag. Our form tag is the same thing that we have a paragraph tag, and then you have information inside of it. Same thing, we have a div tag, and we have information inside of it. The form tag lets the browser know that what we have inside of there is a form. So what we need to do now is we need to actually start building this site and start building this form. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a div, we're going to create a field set, and then inside of that we're going to use a legend. So the legend, for example, is personal information. When we refresh, you can see that anything we put inside of here, any of our input fields or form fields, are going to be based with personal information. It's another way to kind of create another group for users to be able to better understand the form and help them as they're going through the form to be able to see what area they're in and how much more do they have before they have to finish up the form. So in this case, it's going to be a very short form. It should have about three stages, and then we're going to start. We're going to build this again, and it should be easy for users to fill it in. So the first thing we need to do, we have the legend, we have the field set, so we're containing that content in there. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a div with a class of form group. This is going to help us with containing our label in our form field. So the first thing we need to add is going to be the label, and we're going to say that this label is going to be for our first name, and then we're going to say first name as far as our label, and then we're going to create an input field. An input field is what we use to be able to input information in. Now, keep in mind, these input fields are meant to be used for a single line of content, maybe a few words, but not really for paragraphs of information. If you're requiring a user to fill in paragraphs of information, then you might as well give them what is called a text area, which we're going to look in just a little bit. I just wanted to show that to you. Now, the importance of having a label is that if somebody is visually impaired, what happens is that the screen reader will read to them that this label is associated to this input field. However, look, I'm clicking on the label and nothing is happening. In order to focus on the input field, I have to click on the input field right now. In order to fix that and let screen readers and users know that this label is associated to this input field, we need to associate them using the input field ID. So what we do in the input field, we add ID and we set first name. So this value that we have on the label here for ID is going to be the same for that one there. So now when we click here on first name on the label, it will automatically focus on the form field. Take a look, we click on first name and then it focuses on the input field. So that's what we need to do. Anytime that we have a label, we need to make sure that our for value is equal to the ID value. Does it have to be first name? It doesn't have to be first name. Usually what I do with IDs, I try to separate by a dash, or you can do camel casing or any other way, but this is the easiest way to kind of keep things clear. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to also add a name for it as well. Now this name field here is what gets submitted to the server so that the server can understand that this is the name field, the first name field, and understand the content that is coming from there, and then be able to organize it, validate it, and then submit it, save it to a server, send it to an email, or send it back to the user and let them know, hey, you made a mistake here. So now we have this first name. Let's go ahead and also add a class of form control. This is just so that we can have a class associated to our input fields so that a lot of the styles would apply to all of them. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're also going to make it a required field. If we want it to be required, we just have to type in required, and then it will let the user know before they submit that this is a required field and they need to put their information in there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate these a couple times. And the second thing that we're going to add, the second form field, is going to be the middle initial. Maybe we want to ask for middle initial for my users, and that's what we're going to add here, middle initial. Again, we're making sure that our ID and our for values are the same. For our name, we're also doing the same, but we don't want it to be required. Okay, and for the last one, we're going to do last name. And here we're also going to make these changes, but I do want last name to be required. So you can see that, again, you have 3 input fields, and again, first name and last name will be required. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about is also the input types. For the input, you have multiple types. So you have, for example, text, and when you refresh, you see is the same value as you have every time. That's the value of text. You also have number. Number allows the user to enter numbers here. And again, if you enter anything but numbers and you move out of it, it will tell you that it is wrong because it should only accept numbers. See? And again, it also changes how your form looks. It has these arrows that most browsers actually implemented for you. And then the other one that we're going to see right away is going to be email. If we have email here, if you, for example, just enter one letter, it won't recognize it as an email address. In order to be valid as an email address, it has to have some information, an @ sign, and some information after the @ sign. After they enter that information, then it concludes that it's going to be a valid email address. But again, it can be easily bypassed by if you know how to do it. So never trust just your HTML form formatting and style and types to validate a form. Later on, as you progress learning JavaScript and stuff like that, you could validate a form using JavaScript, and then you can also do it on the server side as well. But again, those are just different form input types. Okay, so for the first one, we're going to use text. We're going to use text for the input first name, middle initial, and last name. So all of these are the same. Now for middle initial, hopefully you know that an initial is just a single letter, but check this out. It's still letting me type in a lot of information. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here and we're going to say we only want a user to be able to enter one value. So we can do max length is equals to 1. By doing this, when we refresh our browser, no matter how much I try to type, it would only let me do one single value. Now, that ideally should be reflected when we are making the sizing of this field, because right now it looks like I can enter as much information as I can enter on the one above. So we're going to make that smaller and work on that together. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're also going to get their email address and their phone number. So here we're going to say email and change this value to email and change the type to email and the ID to email, the name to email. And then again, if we want the phone number, we're going to do the same thing. So we have phone number. And then here we're going to change that to phone number, ID, last name, we should change that to phone number, but we're not going to make phone number required. We are going to leave email as required. Now, I have a question for you. For a phone number, should we do text or should we do number? I want you to think about that. So I give you a couple seconds to think it through. And as you're looking at this, you got it? We'll see. So when we're doing phone number, we should actually use text as our input type. The problem is that in the United States, sometimes we may use things where we're formatting our phone number, right? And then we have these values here, which that's what we're using this, right, to be able to format, say phone number is this, it looks this way. So it's not necessarily just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, right? If it was that way, then maybe, but anytime that you include some like a dash or a period or something like that, the best thing to do is just use text. So with that information, I think we're set. We have all the personal information that we need for a user to be able to submit to us so that we can get these forms started. Now, the next section that we're going to create is going to be field set, legend, and then we're going to say reason for contact. We're going to create another area and see it says reason for contact. Now guess what we're going to enter? The reason why we're contacting them. So, or they're contacting us. So let's go ahead and create a div with a class of form group. And then here we're going to do a label for, and then we're going to say here reason. We're just going to say reason. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a new input field or a form field called select. For select, we're also going to give it an ID class or ID of reason. We're also going to give it a class of form control. And then we're also going to give it a name of reason. Okay. And then inside of it, what we're going to do is we're going to give the user options. So we have option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, and we have values that we're passing down. So what's going to happen? 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we have these different values. So for example, general, hire me, for example, web design, app development, and then the last one is going to be videography, because that's kind of what I do in regards, or that's what John Smith does, right? To be able to get some work. So we're going to do that, hire me, and then general, perfect. And now you'll see that when we refresh the page, We have now these reasons with this drop down here, where we have all these different values. Now you notice that we're using this value attribute here on the option. So what happens is that because a user doesn't have a way to enter information on a drop down like this select, we have to provide the reason why that they are selecting that input field or that option. So if we were to do that, we can also do that in all these other areas right here. So for example, in email, we can say value. We want your email to look like, for example, this user at domain.com, for example, right? But what's the problem with this? We're actually giving them a value here. If a user wants to fill this in, they'll have to select it, delete it, and then enter their email address. Now, that's a little bit cumbersome. So here's what happens. We can actually, instead of using value for some input fields, we can say something like placeholder instead. If we use placeholder, what happens, you'll see that it has a very lighter gray inside of it. And when a user starts typing, then their email goes, that placeholder or that hint goes away. If we feel that they might have some trouble filling that area, we could also give them an extra help by adding some extra helper text. Like for example, adding the in the class of small that we created in the past, and say something like, please use a valid email address when filling out this form, right? Such as user@domain.com, right? We can do that. And then if we wanted to, we can even maybe emphasize this area right here so that it has some a little bit of italics, makes it a little bit easier to see, and kind of, puts them aside from the rest of the content. So now we talked about placeholder, we talked about the select, and we added some values here, right? So we have the reason, ID, form control. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to allow them, our users, to actually enter a lot of information, like what's the reason, like give us more details. So we're going to do the div class form group, and then we're going to do the label for details, and then please provide more details, right? And then here we can, instead of using just an input field, let's go ahead and allow them to enter as much information as they want. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a text area with an ID of details, and we're going to do a name of details. And we're also going to add a class of form control. And notice the following. Text area is not a self-closing tag in comparison to, for example, our input field, which is. Notice that text area actually does require a closing tag outside of it. So when we refresh, now we have a context area, a text area. And if you look in here, you can actually enter multiple lines of text, making it easier for a user to be able to enter a lot of information if they need to when they're contacting us. All right, so we have our reason, please provide more details. And again, when I click on each one of these fields, these labels, it should select which input field, right, they're associated to. Always make sure that those are set up properly. So now then let's use something at the end, right? Let's go ahead and add another section, field set, and then legend. And here we're going to say, sign up for our newsletter. Okay, we refresh, and now we're going to sign up, ask them if they want to sign up for our newsletter. So inside of there, we're going to add the same thing. We're going to add a div with a class, and instead of form group, actually, let's go ahead and add a little paragraph, maybe that gives information about our newsletter and what we're what we're all about and why they should sign up, giving them a reason to take the time to actually sign up here. And then what we're going to tell them is, say, for example, we're going to do div with a class. Instead of form group, we're going to say form check, okay, because we're going to use a checkbox in this case. And instead of doing the label first, we're going to do the checkbox first. So let's go ahead and I'm going to copy this input field over here. Let's go one that has less information. All right, there you go. Okay, very good. So the type is going to be checkbox. Our ID is going to be subscribe. Our name is going to be subscribe. We're still going to use form control here. And then we don't need a placeholder because this is a checkbox. And we're not going to make it required because we don't want to force users to have to sign up. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do label for, and then we're going to say subscribe here. Okay. And then here, check the box if you'd like to subscribe to our newsletter, to my newsletter, right? Okay. And when we refresh, then you can see if they click on the label, it will update and check or uncheck the newsletter. Now, something for you to mull over is that if you notice, I could potentially make it so that this is automatically checked. Let's go ahead and take a look at this, import checked. All right, we can make it so that it's automatically checked here. If it didn't work, I had to hard refresh my browser so that it can remove the options that I have been clicking. So you can make sure that, we can make it so that it's automatically checked. Now the problem is that if we leave it to be automatically checked, some countries want to make sure that their users' privacy are not being invaded. In other words, if somebody's signing up, it's because they actually personally clicked on that checkbox to sign up for that service or agreement. Okay. Now, very important, countries in Europe, in Canada, as well as, for example, the state of California, I believe have to have something which is a double confirmation, meaning that if I were to subscribe to something, these get sent to a server. The server in return will have to email the person that is subscribing to the service or whatever and say, are you sure you want to continue subscribing? So if they don't have that double authentication, you could potentially get sued. So always make sure if anybody's signing up or subscribing for something, it's best if you make sure 100% that they want to sign up for that service or agree to whatever you're asking them to agree on. Now, checkboxes are very interesting because we could duplicate this and we're going to delete this. So if you don't want to duplicate it, you don't have to, but I just want to show you. So here, for example, we can say something like unsubscribe and we'll keep the same name, right? And then here we're going to say unsubscribe, and down here we can say unsubscribe. Okay, when we refresh, see, we have this value and this value, but notice that I kept my name the same. What happens is that when the form gets submitted, because these are checkboxes, it would send an array of whatever gets submitted. So if they selected only one value, then they would only receive an array of one value inside of it. If it has two values, then it will receive an array of two values inside of it. If it has none of them checked, then you will receive an empty array with nothing submitted to it. So it's always very important that when you have checkboxes, that you remember that they are able to subscribe or click as many options as they have available. So if you're making sure, if you're thinking this way, if you have multiple options, then give them the options to use a checkbox so they can check on what they actually want to sign up or they don't want to sign up on. But know that, again, it gets submitted as an array. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, again, like I said, I'm going to delete that because it makes no sense. Why would somebody do an unsubscribe here? If you have to unsubscribe, you should be able to unsubscribe directly on that email newsletter. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an H3 saying something like frequency. Right here we can say frequency. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something very similar to what we did here on the input field. And instead of the checkbox, what we're going to do is going to be a radio. You'll see here, and then I'm going to call it daily. The name is going to be frequency. Everything else is going to be the same, daily. And then here we're going to say daily as well. I am going to copy this over, and we'll refresh the browser in just a little bit so that you can see what's happening. So here we're going to say weekly, weekly, and here weekly. We're going to say bi-weekly, bi-weekly. Sorry. I like things to be consistent if you haven't noticed. All right. Bi-weekly. Perfect. And then monthly here. But again, I'm keeping the name the same. So when I refresh here, now you can see what a radio button looks like. A radio button looks just like this. When I click on something, these are all considered a group of input fields, right? This group is considered all in one. So when I click here, right, then at that point, I'm only selecting one value. And that's why in here, when it comes down to our input fields for our radio and for our checkboxes, we have all of this, but we also need to provide a value. So for our checkbox that says subscribe, we're going to use the value of subscribe. If we're going to use for the other ones, we're going to do it the same thing. So let's go ahead and duplicate that. So subscribe, change that, change that, change that. And here we're going to say daily, weekly, bi-weekly, and then monthly. So when a user clicks on one of these radio buttons and then it gets submitted to the server, then you can see, for example, what they selected. Let's now go ahead and make sure that we select the first one, which is going to be checked, which is going to be our daily. That's going to be our basic one. So if they do check here to subscribe, then the frequency will be daily. They can choose bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, whatever they choose here. Okay, so again, that's almost the form. It's almost complete. We're just missing one more element here, which is going to be at the end of the field set. We can say we need our button to submit it. So our button is going to be a type of submit. Class of, we're going to use our class styles, BTN primary. And then we're going to say something like send form. Okay, and then I'm going to duplicate this. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to show you another type of button that can be added to our form. So this one, I'm going to call it secondary. And then I'm going to call this the no button. Okay. When we refresh this, we have two buttons here. If I try to send this form, take a look at what happens. All the fields that are set up as required would highlight, letting the user know these fields are required. Please make sure that you fill those in. Now, let me show you something that happens here. We have this form. We're ready to submit this. And then instead of clicking the send form, we click the no button. When we click the no button, because it has a type of reset, what it does is that it resets the full form, meaning that you lose every and all the information that you had selected in the past. No matter what you selected, when you click the no button, the no button will take it in its own hands to destroy your life, and you will hate having to fill out this form. That's why when I started coding, back in the 90s, We used to have reset buttons because we thought that it was a good idea. It was available, why not? However, as forms got longer and longer, we decided, you know what, it's not a very good idea to have a no button right next to a send button. And sometimes the colors look the same, they look very similar to each other. I think it would be a bad idea to continue having that there. Now, if your business or whatever action you're creating for requires it, then feel free to use a no button. But if I would suggest most forms really don't need it, especially very long forms where you're not tracking user activity from section to section, because if they click the no button, they'll be very upset, and I'm not sure if they will continue filling out the form again, unless it's something like FAFSA or that something that they need. So most of the time, I omit the no button. And our no button also, our submit form also has to have an ID of submit. I'm going to give it submit and a name of submit as well. All right, here we go. We refresh this, and now we have our form. The next thing that we need to do is we actually need to add some styles to associate some of these, make this look a little bit prettier compared to the rest of the site. So let's go back to our CSS and add some areas here. So let's go ahead and call it form, end of form. And let's go ahead and do the form element itself. And let's add some margin bottom of 2.1618 rem, just so that it can have some space between the form itself and whatever content is below it. Then inside of it, we're going to have the field set. The field set, we're going to add a margin bottom of 1.618 rem, so that there's a little bit more space between each one of the field sets here. See, kind of creates a little bit of separation. Then you notice that it has this little border over here. What we're going to do is, in the background, I had already added this color right here, this 99999. And that's the color that I am going to use for our border here. So let's go ahead and do border, 1 pixel solid, and then use that 999 color, 6 nines. And then we're going to remove all margins. Let's go ahead and do that at the very top. Margin 0, so that it can get spaced in. And then we're also going to add some padding. So we're going to add a little bit of padding on the top because we have some text in here and a natural separation in there. But then we also need to add a 1 rem to the left and right, and then say 1 rem to the bottom as well. When we refresh this, it shouldn't have had a lot of impact, but you can see a little bit of separation now in each one of these areas. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use our field set and then use our legend and change the color of the legend. Let's go ahead and go back to our color here. Let's use this secondary color, for example, for our legend in here. And let's say color, and we're going to use that. And let's use the font weight to say, for example, something like 700, which is semi-bold. Let's take a look at the type, for example. Let's see, select element. Very good. So that's the style there, and it's using a 700 in there. So let's go ahead and use the font family to be the same as our headings, since it's going to be our legend. I think that looks really nice. I think we need a little bit more spacing towards the bottom, so let's go ahead and change that to 1.618 rem. So there's a little more spacing towards the bottom from the form field itself. All right, I think that's looking a little bit nicer. Now let's go ahead and focus on our form groups. Then the next thing we're going to do is form group. We're going to add some styles to it, and then we're also going to add some styles to the form control that is inside of our form group. Okay, always very important because we're using a different style for our check boxes. So our form group, we're going to make it a flex box element. So display, flex, flex, flow, row wrap, align items, flex start, align content, flex start, justify content flex start as well. Our form control, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that it spans 100% width. So we're going to say flex 0, 0, 100%. We're going to make sure that the minimum width is 1 rem as the minimum width for that element. And you can see that we have that now here. Now, something that is very interesting here is that you notice that the font size is smaller, the color is a little bit different, and it doesn't seem like it's the same font family. Take a look at this last name. See the A's and the E and all that is a little bit different. So let's go ahead and fix that. What we're going to do is we're going to say font size, inherit, color, inherit, and font family, inherit. By doing that, we're saying we want to inherit the same values as what we're using on our body tag, okay? So that's what we're going to do here. Let's go ahead and do padding as well here. And for our padding, let's do 0.25 rem top and bottom. And then let's go ahead and do 0 for left and right because we're going to style it a little bit differently here. So the next thing we're also going to do is we're going to do the border radius to be 0 because I personally don't like this border radius on the corner of the form fields. So they're a little more flat, as you can see. So the edge. And then I'm going to get rid of this bevel that we have in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say border 0 none to kind of zero it out. And then I am going to say border bottom 1 pixel solid black. What this is going to do is going to make it look a little bit more like the forms that you fill in when you are doing an application on a paper form and stuff like that. Again, that's a style that I like. If you want to, feel free to make changes to make the styles look a little bit closer to kind of your vision is for this form. Our form groups, I'm also going to add a margin bottom of 1.618 rem, so there's a little more space between each one of these input fields. I'm not sure if 1.618 rem is a little bit too much, so let's go ahead and bring it down to 1. And then also, because we're now using this field set here, let's go ahead and make that 1 rem as well. Now, because we're adding more styles, more spacing here. So let's go ahead and refresh that. And this should be refreshing and making it look this way, right? So again, a little bit less space towards the bottom in here. I think that looks really good. And see, most of our styles kind of have been updated because of that. The next thing we need to do is select our select element here. And then here, what we need to do, go back up here. All right. Select background color, white. When I refresh that, now our background color looks that way. And our form drop down looks this way. I think it looks good. Now, our next thing that we need to style is going to be our text area. The problem with the text area here is that it still follows the same example as up here, but this starts typing from the very top. See that? So what I need to do, I need to make sure that our text area also is actually fully wrapped and it has a little bit more padding. So we're going to do text area. They're going to do padding of 0.25 rem, so it goes all around it, and border 1 pixel solid black. And let's make sure that we're selecting the text area properly, because if we do this right now, we refresh this. Notice that it still only has the bottom border. That's because we're being very specific up here, see? So we need to be a little more specific with that as well. So form group with a text area that has a class of form control. When I refresh this, now this looks like it has a little bit more padding. It has a little bit more space in here, right? And then I think that looks a little bit better. I'm changing 0.25 REM to 0.25 EM. And it's the same thing. So again, I think this looks a little bit cleaner. Now, notice this paragraph down here. We have this paragraph and automatically our browser is adding margin to our paragraph top and bottom. So what we need to do here is we also need to make sure that we address some of those styles for, say, tags and paragraphs and stuff like that. The frequency seems to be a little bit too close to this other input field up here or form field up there. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. We're going to say field set. Actually, let's go back up here to where field set is. Let's go in after legend, and we're going to say field set, paragraph, margin 0. And then we're going to do field set H3, margin 0. So that should remove some of the margins. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do padding bottom of 1 REM so that it has a little more spacing. And we're going to add a little bit extra spacing for our field set H3. If I can type. We're going to add a little bit of spacing towards the top. So margin top 1.618 REM. And now you see that it has a little bit more space. We have our little description of what our newsletter is all about. If they want to check, they can check, and if they can select their frequency in here. Now, what if I wanted these input fields, so instead of occupying this much space, to kind of go next to each other? What we're going to do is we're going to go back to our contact div, and we're going to go see where we have our form check. And here what we're going to add is we're going to add a class modifier of inline. Okay, we're going to add this inline. When we refresh, nothing happens because we haven't added any styles associated to them. So let's go ahead and do this. So we have our form group up here, form control, that's fine. Let's go down here. So let's go to form check inline, and let's go ahead and say display inline flex. Just by adding this, you can see that now they're moving inline next to each other. What we're going to do is we're going to continue making sure that we have all our flex declarations set up in here. Flex flow is going to be row wrap. In this case, align items is going to be center. Align content is going to be flex start, and then justify content is going to be flex start. And then I do want it to have a margin to the right of 1 REM so that there's a little bit separation between this content in here. Now if we make this responsive and start bringing our window down, you'll see that it will accommodate as it can, so that if it doesn't have enough space, then you'll move the content to the next line automatically. Now, I think this is looking really good. One thing that we can see now is that because we're using this button here, notice that first of all, it doesn't give us the hand on the button, and then it has this border around it. So it's something that we need to handle on our styles for the button. So let's go to the button primary, which is the style that we use. And let's go ahead and do for all of our buttons, let's do the cursor to be pointer, which that will give us the pointer now here. And then we're going to say border 0 none to make sure that it removes all the borders from all the styles. So that way, if we change this to secondary, tertiary, whatever it may be, then it would not have that border around it. So I think all in all, our form is looking pretty good. Now, let's take a look up here. I personally feel that we could do this a little bit better. What if we wanted to take advantage of the grid system that we created to kind of align some of the content in the form? Let's go ahead and do that real quick. So let's go all the way to the top. where we're having their first name, last name, middle initial. Right here we have our form groups. Let's go ahead and add a container around it. We're going to say div with a class of form row. Now this is going to wrap around the first 3 elements here. And of course, we're going to indent it. Hopefully by now you've seen that every time that I add a new element, I indent, just because it makes it easier to read and know that everything between these and these are one element. Everything between these and these is another element. So indentation helps not only future developers see the code better, but also you when you're debugging and having issues with your code. So now we're going to do this call extra small 12 for our first form group, and we're going to do call medium, let's do 5, for example, here. We're going to duplicate that for the other one here for the last name, and for the middle one with the middle initial, let's do call extra small 4, and then call medium 2, and then we're going to refresh our page. Well, we have the values here. See that they're next to each other, but what's happening? Why isn't this not going into the same row? That's because we created a new element called form row. So let's go ahead and let's go all the way to the very top, get to where we have our row styles here, and guess what? We're just going to copy this over so that we can use it for our next element here. So add that, and we're going to call it form row. When we save this and refresh this, now you can see that we have this value in here, and we need to just kill or remove that margin bottom so that it continues looking the same way as we had before. So by adding that, now anything that we wrap, we could potentially just use the information that we have right here to be able to use our grid system inside of our form as well. You could potentially make this email to be half the size and then the phone number to be half the size as well on the next one. Same thing for reasons if you wanted to, or even if you wanted to make sure that these are spaced out equally, then you can do the same thing on the bottom. In our case, we're just going to do it on the very top element. Now, if you look in here, we can have our first name, John A. Smith, john@domain.com, right? And now that we have filled that out, if we click on send form, you'll see that something happened up here. Look at the parameters that we have on the top area. It gives us the first name, middle initial, last name, email, and then no phone number is empty, reason is general, there's no details, frequency. You can see that we have those values in there. That's because the form doesn't have a way to be processed. What we're going to do now, I'm going to explain this more in theory because we don't have a way to actually submit this form. So the first thing that we need to do on our form is that we need to add an action. The action calls to the file in the server that is going to handle the form submission. Usually something like contact.php or something like that. But in our case, we don't have that. So I'm going to use contact.html just so that we can see the outcome in the contact.html page. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to select the method. We have two methods to submit in this form. If we refresh here, we have the method that we just did right now. Let's go ahead and do this. Select that dummy variable. And when we submit, then it's going to give us these values on the top right here. So they get passed on as a parameter for the server to handle. Now, we can also submit it as a post. The difference is that if we submit this as a post, right, and we do something like John A. Smith at john@domain.com, and we submit this, I want you to pay attention to the parameters on the very top. When we click submit, then nothing happens. Nothing is there. Usually what this would have happened is it would have hit the page first, passed on the values, and then allow the page to process whatever it needs to process, and then return this page back. Usually when you're working on PHP or a backend programming language, then that's kind of how the handshake would happen. It will pass on, it'll get this information and pull it through, and then validate the value inside of whatever input fields that we have here. In our case, we're not going to do that, so that's why I'm showing you this theoretically speaking. And another thing that I may consider doing is using autocomplete. You can do autocomplete on, which is automatically what we have, and we also have off. Right now, if you notice here, when I type in the letter J, it automatically tells me the name, John. But look at this, now that I have turned it off here, and I type in the letter J, I don't have any more suggestions. See? And what happens is that, again, I'm not allowing the form to autocomplete the values. If you have, if you're creating a form that maybe multiple users are going to be using, then maybe you want to use in one computer, then maybe you want to turn autocomplete off so that information doesn't get stored on the browser and that you're not able to pull the values from, say, the person that was filling out the form before. So always very important to think about this as you're building this page. And again, you could also have an ID, contact form here as well. I think with that, we were able to complete our form submission and creation. We've done the home page, about page, projects, our individual project page, and now we have our contact page. And I think with all of this, you should be able to create all of these and create a pretty amazing website. I hope that you have learned all this content and you have enjoyed creating and learning HTML and CSS. But this is not the end. I still have a couple more thoughts that I would like to show and demonstrate to you guys, for you guys to build maybe a rotating banner, and also build simple like FAQ, open, close kind of container that would be very useful and is used widely in multiple sites. And it's going to be very simple, again, HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript, just to introduce some information on JavaScript, and I think will be very useful as you continue developing your knowledge and growing in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, learning more and more. If you have questions, comments, and concerns, leave them in the comment section below. And I would encourage you, take a look at the description of the video so that you can see some of the other resources that I am going to add in there if you would like to expand your knowledge on some of the input fields, form elements, and maybe even some ideas about forms and what are best standards and procedures. I would also, at the end of this video, I created a more extensive study on form fields before, and I'm going to add them at the end of this video so that you can see those and click on them and learn, where I also create a form very similar to this, where we go over each one of those values as well. So again, if you have questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comments below. And until then, happy coding. See you then.